Hey class, Prof JC here. We are in week 7 and our final video for the class, and I can't think of a better way to end than by talking about 8 ways to build trust. 8 ways to build trust. I recommend you get this book at some point in your journey. John Maxwell, Everyone Communicates, Few Connect. He actually has a new book out on communication. We'll probably actually get that book and we'll start using that book maybe next time I teach this course. I think it's got like 16 chapters or something like that. So it's like 2 chapters a week or something like that. But so I want to recommend you get this book, but also look for John Maxwell books. He's been very impactful in my own leadership journey. I know he will be for you. So here's what the heading of this is chapter 10, and it says, connectors live what they communicate. Connectors live what they communicate. That is so important for us to understand. And we talked about that a little bit, so I won't try to belabor that point. It's really important that we can, that we are, well, as it says right here, it's important that we are the message, right? So what we're trying to communicate, what we're trying to lead, that we're living in such a way that people trust us and they can follow us. People don't follow what they don't trust. I've had friends of mine, and I've seen kids, way back when I got out of the military, I worked with troubled kids. And a lot of these kids, almost every single one of the kids, had parents that could not be trusted. Parents who had done things, I went and I spoke at the local juvenile halls here in San Diego a few years ago, and I was actually part of the Chargers. We'd go around, and I got asked to be on their group. We'd go around and we would do talks at the local juvenile halls. And I'll never forget this one kid, and he really resonated with me. The reason why he was in jail really was because he had an aunt and an uncle, and both of them were running drugs, and that's just what they did for a living. I think his uncle had also done some time for murder or something like that, but his job was he'd actually already murdered somebody. I didn't get the whole story, but someone told me later that's what he did. But his job was to help run those drugs, and he would drive the car and he'd do all kinds of stuff. And then he got a little heavier, led into he'd actually killed somebody, and this is like a 15-year-old kid, if you can imagine. And I was able to talk to him for a little bit. I didn't know any of that stuff. I didn't know about the murder when I was talking to him, but he just shared kind of his uncle and aunt, and that's who he was living with. His mom and dad were obviously out of the picture. But the lack of trust that this young man had in just about any adult was just so prevalent because everybody had let him down. And, this is a kid who's going to have a hard time following anyone. But I thought about him and I thought about leadership, and I just thought this is so important for us as leaders to understand, is that we have such a sacred trust. When people are working for us, I don't care if you're managing a department at Walmart or if you're the CEO of Walt Disney World. Both of those are leadership, because people, they come in and they trust us just by the title that you have, just by the title that we have. They trust you. And so it's really important that you earn that trust. And people will trust you right away because you have the title. They automatically assume because they're in this position, somebody else has trusted them, I can trust them. We cannot ever lose that trust. Just today, I was on a website that kind of keeps in touch. I spent some time in ministry, and so I'm always interested in that world and kind of how it goes, how church ministry goes, and leaders and pastors. And there was a guy that I saw 2, 3, 4 years ago, and I remember I was so impressed with him. And I remember thinking, wow, now this is a young man who's got great leadership potential. He was doing an interview with an older gentleman, and I just had a lot of respect for that. He really revered the person. He listened to the questions. He asked great questions. He listened. And I said, this guy is going to do great things. He'll be around for the next 40 years. He's going to be a great pastor. Just today, an article comes out, and he's being accused by 25 to 30 former staff members of being a bully, intimidation, financial misuse, within the organization. And, we'll see if any of it sticks. Sometimes when people come out and they say that, oftentimes what they mean is, they have a tough boss. But I don't think it was just this. There's a huge story that was kind of written on this. And this is a gentleman who sounded like he lied before. He'd lied about mentors, who his mentors were. It was really disappointing for me to read. And actually, as I pulled up the article, I'm sitting here in my office. I happened to be looking at it as soon as I came in, and I pulled up the article, and there's no one else in the building today, but I just said, daggone it. And I just, this sense of frustration that this guy who I'd look to, not necessarily maybe as a leader for myself, he's a little bit younger than I am, and I tend to kind of follow people a little bit older than I am. Not that I can't learn from younger people as well, but just from my own mentors, right? I always have, some people who are a few steps further than I am. But I remember looking at him and saying, that guy's going to be an incredible leader. That's the kind of guy that I want my kids to follow. And then to read this stuff today, it just was disappointing, right? In some ways, he broke trust. So let's talk about eight ways to build trust, because here's the deal. You got to do it. Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a nonprofit leader, whether you're in the corporate world, whether you're at Walmart, it doesn't matter. Whether you're managing a gas station, I don't care, right? We've got to be able to be people who can build trust so that we can be trusted and so that we can lead other people and that people will follow us. So here's the first way: connect with your spouse. Connect with yourself. Connect with yourself. That's number one. The relationships we have with others are largely determined by the relationships we have with ourselves. That's so important for us to understand. If we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, right, we're not going to have a good relationship with other people. If we're not accepting of who we are, John Maxwell states, if we are uncomfortable with ourselves as people, if we don't know our own strengths and weaknesses, then the attempts we make to connect with others will usually misfire. And this is something that I've talked about before as well. If we don't have a good relationship with ourselves, often we're looking for people to fill up the holes that we have in our own life. And so we come to every relationship with a sense of neediness. And we come to relationships with a sense of, what can I take from the other person? How can I use this relationship to help fill me up, to help fill up my, my deficits, whatever they may be? That's not how we should do it, right? So then he gives some ways, but he talks about the importance of a self-assessment. You're going to take all that. You've probably taken all that already. You will take it. If you come back from a master's program, you're going to do it again. We believe in self-assessment. It's really important that you get to know yourself, that you know what your strengths are, that you know what your weaknesses are, that you know what your weaknesses are, and that you're self-aware of where you stand. That's all very important. Number two, right your wrongs. Right your wrongs. John Maxwell says, as I mentioned, to connect with people, you must have credibility. But how much credibility can you maintain when you make mistakes? And then he says that depends on how you respond. And then he writes this: failure to admit mistakes causes the message to be questioned, which causes the integrity of the leader to be questioned. And he put that right there. It's right there. He almost made a new paragraph out of that and put that right there in the center, just so that we'd see that. Failure to admit mistakes causes the message to be questioned, which causes the integrity of the leader to be questioned. So what he's saying is that as leaders, we've got to mess up. And then he gives some examples. Acknowledge your mistakes. Apologize. That means we look into the eyes of the people that we wronged and we say, I am sorry for what I did. Make amends. How important that is. Number three is this: be accountable. Be accountable. Okay? That means that he writes here, one of the best compliments that you can give to another person, or he said, what is one of the best compliments that you can give to another person? And then John Maxwell says this: I believe it is this: I can count on you. I can count on you. What a great thing to have been said, to be said about you. What a great thing to be said about me, that people can count on us. That's why I included the law of accountability in the 17 indisputable laws of teamwork. It says teammates must be able to count on each other when it counts. But that need for us to be countable and accountable to one another is true for any relationship, not just those on any team. And here's the reason why. When you make a commitment, you create hope. When you keep a commitment, you create trust. That's deep right there. When you make a commitment, you create hope. Those of you who are in long-term relationships or marriages, you understand this. There's something about that commitment that you make that says, I can rest in this. There's a sense of hope. We have a journey that we're going to do together. But then it says, when you keep that commitment, you create trust. And that happens time after time after time after time. It happens over time. And you know this, and I know this, that it's easy to break that trust. And how do we break that trust? By breaking commitments. Every time we break a commitment, we break trust. And it's important that we don't do that. Number 4, he says this: lead the way you live. Lead the way you live. Author and speaker Jim Rohn observed, you cannot speak that which you do not know. You cannot share that which you do not feel. You cannot translate that which you do not have, and you cannot give that which you do not possess. To give it and to share it, and for it to be effective, you first need to have it. And that's so important as leaders, and we talked about this previously, that if people are going to trust you, if they're going to be inspired by you, they have to feel the passion that you have. So whatever it is that you go into, you got to be passionate about it. It's got to be something that's so deep inside you so that people can trust what you're saying, right? And then you have to lead the way you live. And I would say this: live the way you lead as well, right? It goes back and forth, right? That what he's talking about there, it is integrity. I see you leading, and I see you living in the same way that you're leading, and that's important. That helps to build trust. Number 5, and this is so important: tell the truth. And I would add there, tell the truth always. Tell the truth always. That's very important. I don't need to go into that one. It's just important that we always speak the truth. We always tell the truth. Don't gossip about other people. That's what weak people do. That's what people who lack courage do. They tell the truth, but they do it behind someone's back. That's not leadership. That lacks courage. That lacks strength. That lacks it lacks character. People with character and courage, they tell the truth and they tell you to your face. Now, that doesn't mean you do it in front of everyone else. You might have to take somebody aside, but you tell the truth. Number 6 is this: be vulnerable. Be vulnerable. John Maxwell says this: when you are honest with people, it makes you vulnerable. Many people find that to be very vulnerable. Many people find that to be very uncomfortable. Some leaders, teachers, and speakers believe that someone who communicates to others is supposed to have all the answers. Otherwise, they worry that they will appear weak. But obviously, that's an unrealistic standard. It's better to be authentic and vulnerable because people can identify with that, and that leads to connection. Parker Palmer, the author of The Courage to Teach, one of the greatest books I've ever read, says, we all know that perfection is a mask. So we don't trust the people behind know-it-all masks. They're not being honest with us. The people with whom we have deepest connection are those who acknowledge their weakness. And I'll tell you this, I just was somewhere I was up in Spokane, Washington. I think I shared that with you. And they had a guest speaker come in. Our team, we invited a guest speaker to come in, phenomenal speaker. I'll just tell you his name, John Acuff, right? So some of you may have heard him before. He's a really great guy. And he gets up to speak, and I just wondered what he was going to say. The first thing that he shared, you talk about starting strong, the first thing that he shared was a story of his life where he had experienced some kind of a failure. And right then and there, and I think he knows that, that's why he's a great speaker, and that's why he gets paid the big bucks. Right then and there, everyone in the room was able to connect with him, because everyone in the room has been through some kind of a failure. And so we got to hear his, and then 2 other times throughout his speech, he spoke for about 45 minutes, and two other times in there, and I sat there and I counted, and it was 2 other times, and he said some other things, but 2 other times he shared other stories where he had messed up, where he'd failed. And it was a brilliant move, because what it did, it immediately set all defensive down, because we don't know this guy from Adam. I was able to meet him the night before. He was down in the lobby. He was eating. So, a group of us were able to sit with him just for a few minutes and kind of talk to him a little bit. So I kind of knew who he was. But outside of that, I didn't know him, outside of social media posts and that kind of stuff. But when he got up there and he talked about his failures, I was able to resonate with that, because I've made mistakes. I've failed. So have you. Right? So when we're building trust, it's important that we be vulnerable. That doesn't mean we tell everybody everything. Okay. There are some of us in the call, we've got, there's a reason why we have closets, right? And some things need to just stay in there. We got to work on them our own selves, or get a therapist or whatever. That doesn't mean you throw up on people. You don't use people as your therapist. But that means if you, again, it goes all the way back to this idea. It's all about them. So if what you're sharing can help somebody else out, then share it. Use that as an example, right? Be vulnerable, but be vulnerable for the purpose of them, helping them. Number 7 is this: follow the golden rule. Follow the golden rule. John Maxwell says, some organizations are like a tree full of monkeys. If you're a leader at the top of the tree, all you see when you look down is a bunch of smiling faces. Look, I love that imagery, right? I'm going to read that again. Some organizations are like a tree full of monkeys. If you're a leader at the top of the tree, all you see when you look down is a bunch of smiling faces looking up to you. However, if you're at the bottom of the organizations and look up, not so pretty. I've heard that before. Every time I chuckle when I think about that. And if you stay where you are, you know you're going to get dumped on by everybody who's above you, right? Nobody wants to be treated that way. John Maxwell then says this: anytime people have power, you can learn a lot about them by watching to see what they do with that power. When they interact with others who don't have power, position, or strength, how do they treat them? Is it consistent with what they communicate? Is it consistent with the golden rule? The answer to those questions will tell you a lot about their character. I firmly believe this: the greatest way to figure out how somebody really is, their character, is watch them interact with somebody who doesn't, with somebody they don't need. Right? When you watch somebody interact with their boss, you're going to get one side of them. When you watch somebody interact with a potential romantic partner, you're going to get a whole different side of them. But when you watch somebody communicate with, say, a waiter, right, like at the local restaurant, or you watch somebody communicate with somebody, maybe they're standing outside the store and they're asking for money, and how does that person communicate with them? Or, you're at the store and you're buying something, and you see how somebody communicates with the person, the cash register, right? That tells you about a person's character, how they treat somebody who they don't need, who can't do anything for them. Okay, follow the golden rule. And number 8 is this, and this is really important. If you're gonna build trust, you have to deliver results. You have to deliver results. Peter Drucker, the father of modern management, asserted, communication always makes demands. It always demands that the recipient become somebody, do something, believe something. It always appeals to motivation. In other words, John Maxwell says, communicators exhort people to deliver results. But to be credible as a communicator, you must also deliver results yourself. And that goes for leaders as well, right? Nothing speaks like results. If you want to build the kind of credibility that connects with people, then deliver results before you deliver a message. And I would say this: deliver results before you lead. Get out and do what you advise others to do. Communicate from experience. There was a person recently who keeps running for office here in San Diego County. And this is actually a good person. I've met this person before. They continue to just run for office, but they've never done anything. They've never built a business. They never stood around somewhere. They just keep going around San Diego County and trying to find the next big open seat and running for that seat. And if that person were to sit down with me and ask me for advice, the thing I would tell them is, hey, before you run for office again, go out and do something. Build credibility, right? Do something where you understand what other people are going through or what people are facing. Build a business, right? That'll help you build credibility as well. All of this is so important. Deliver results, right? And then when you're running on something, you get to say, hey, here's what I've done in the past. Here's what. Now, I know this doesn't always work in politics. You and I can think of several politicians who ran and for major positions around the country, and they ran and they got it, and it seemed like they didn't do very much. That's going to happen, right? But I'd recommend that as the leader, we've got to be in the business of delivering results. So here's what I'm going to ask you, okay? I just shared with you what is 8 ways to build trust. What's the 4th way that I mentioned, okay? Number 4 that I mentioned, what would that be? Number 4, okay? What is the 4th way to build trust, and how do you best do that? Okay, so go back to number 4, write what that is, and I want to know how you best do that in your own life to build leadership. I've really enjoyed these podcasts with you. I hope they've added value to your life, to your leadership journey. And I normally say I'll see you in the next video, but that's not the case. I won't see you in the next video. But if you need anything before now in the end of class, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here if you need me. Take care, everybody. I'll see you soon.